Again, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session as we explore the topic connecting projects to business intent and benefits with the guru, Simon Harris. Over to you, Simon.
Well, Olu, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm pretty sure I didn't write that, or at least not all of it. I think somebody's been doing some research on me. There were some things in there I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have included. I mean, not that there's anything to hide in them. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about me, but I do have a slide for it, and it's the next one. So I'll just speak a little bit to this one on the screen here. The intention is to spend perhaps 45 minutes or so sharing some thoughts about how business intent is what should be driving the creation of the portfolio and through that programs and projects. And I suspect that some of the things that I'm going to say are going to challenge some of the thinking that folk find normal if they come from a textbook direction. And so things like this have been trending over many years. I've got a great pile of them here. I'm not going to pull them all over, but they've been trending over many years to say stuff about projects that I think we can easily trace from the engineering view of how you run projects, and has a history that's perhaps 100 years old or something like that. And that direction has perhaps not always linked things to really why the business is working, and it hasn't always linked things to the governance structures that exist in organizations. Most organizations have some structure that is similar to a chair of the board and a chief executive, whether it's for profit or not, and they have responsibilities for running the organization in times of stability and running the organization in times of change. So I've spent a lot of time over the years trying to run projects and programs and struggling with some of the challenges that creates, and thinking about why that might be. So the title here is reflecting the fact that what we ought to be understanding is how we follow the business intent, support the business intent, and possibly even lead the business intent if our role extends in that direction. And I'm thinking perhaps here about sort of enterprise PMO type roles. I do, as I go through here, hope to give you some concept steps and techniques, and that will take rather more than 45 minutes. So we're not going to go into that in great detail. I'm going to cover them. I'm very happy to follow up in subsequent conversation with folk if you want to understand in more detail, but there's a lot of stuff that we would need to go through to get right down to the how-to. I've seen a couple of folks say that they're not getting sound, but I've equally seen a number of folks say that they can hear things. So I think if you're not getting sound, it's probably a local problem. I have turned the subtitles on, so hopefully that will help you. I did have the subtitles. Yeah, thank you, Ian, for confirming you can hear okay. So if you're not hearing okay, it's local, but at least you can see what's being said in the subtitles at the bottom. This slide just proves that my arithmetic is poor, because I started playing around in projects in 1979, and 1979 to 2019 seems to be more than 30 years, and we've moved on a year since then. So I'm Simon, I'm crap at arithmetic. One Christmas day I did spend it kissing dolphins, or I think the dolphin was kissing me. My wife's idea that was. And I have tried flying microlights at various different times, and I have got quite a lot of books in the house. I'm more than happy to say more things about me, but I'll just move on in the interest of our time frame. Now, to start talking about this topic with some purpose and some intention, I would suggest to you the books that I've just held up and the rest of the ones that are on the shelf over here have increasingly been trying to say in recent years that the project manager role is about delivering benefits. It's a long debate, I think, to get to the bottom of it, but I'm going to say that in my experience, most organisations position the project manager role as a quasi-technical role where that person is expected to understand what the development team is doing, and to expect that quasi-technical role could understand all the nuances of business and benefits and operations, etc., is stretching the role too far. So I think there is a trend of suggestion about what the project role should be. Personally, I don't think it's moving in the right direction, but I think it is driven by the fact that we're not good at linking projects and benefits. That is to say, we're not good at linking the top and the bottom of the organisation. And so, giving that some thought, I'm going to first of all suggest that I think a project is an endeavour that is generally constituted, brought into existence to deliver a product. You could call that an output if you like. If I was playing with some of the other books on the shelf over there, they would call it an output. I'm going to suggest that a program is then the surrounding structure that takes our product and our organization. And there's some important stuff in what I'm saying here that I'll expand and echo later. But the program takes the product and the organization as a whole and brings us to a position where we can start a benefits flow. And now we are getting into the title. We're getting into the mechanics of what the title of the event's about. And I'm going to say that a portfolio is a balancing act between all of the demands that we could have on the resources that are in the organization. And I'm going to express this in a slightly different way to the way that is often used by project and program related folk to talk about portfolio. I'm going to say the portfolio is all the uses of energy within the organization. So you might talk about a sub portfolio in there, which is just the projects and programs. But I'm going to start from the perspective that the portfolio is all the things the organization is doing, some of which is RTO, run the organization, and some is CTO, change the organization. And I'm going to express that in terms that Professors Kaplan and Norton would have been quite content with when they developed the balanced scorecard, which is to say that we have to balance short and long term, and that's about being able to generate activity today that generates benefits tomorrow. Benefits tomorrow pay for activity tomorrow, and so we get a cycle, and you have to be balanced in the factors that lead to benefits. And I'm going to say that value is benefit in excess of cost, and that and the caveat here that is always necessary for those people who then want to say, but it's not all about money, and it definitely isn't all about money. So there's three definitions I want to start with, and now I'm going to build some pictures of how organizations work, and I'm going to build a picture about 3 times over because I want to take different perspectives, and I want to get to the position where we have a gated governance structure running across those perspectives. So I'm going to start with a landscape, and the landscape runs down the page from senior leadership at the top to execution and folk at the bottom, and I'm saying business is grey or black, and the consideration of product and of management is blue, and activity to execute and achieve results is red. And I'm going to use those colours consistently as we go through. So here's a bit of a key. I've got a few other colours in there. I will cover those as we need to. And I'm going to say that the organisation is typically drawn as the pyramid, and I am quite conscious of turning it upside down for servant leadership, but that's not something I'm going to discuss in detail here. And I'm going to say that the organisation has a finite amount of resource available to it to operate its total set of activities. And things happen outside the business which mean that our reason for existing, our mission and our values are affected in ways that trigger us to consider the design of the organisation. And that design of the organisation is the mapping from our what we believe in, why we exist, what pressures we're facing, and how we're going to meet those pressures. And I'm going to suggest that how we're going to meet those pressures at that top level of the organisation we can call vision. So I'm going to say mission is enduring, and I'm going to say that vision is a point on the horizon that we can work towards, and so vision is ephemeral. You can change that. You can use those words the opposite way round. Miles, YMMV, is your mileage may vary, i.e. you may have a different opinion on it. Nothing I'm saying I believe is the absolute truth. Everything I think is a possibility, is an option. So pressure hits the organisation, and that causes the folk at the top or at the bottom, but that's complicating the picture too much just at the moment, causes the folk at the top to say this is where we need to go. That can then be considered as part of the portfolio, and I could here start talking about things like Kanban driven portfolio, but that then starts us to consider how we use our resources. There's a cascade of intention and constraint. There's a delegation of authority and tolerances and freedoms, and this is the beginning of building governance structures. But it also means that all the resources, when we have need for change, cannot be used for running the organisation and generating operational benefits. We need to redirect resources into the change side of our activities, and that's where our programs and our projects are then consuming resource. Now, as a result of pressures on the organisation, something that I don't think is very commonly expressed, or I know it's not very commonly expressed in these books, is that it's all very well a project producing a product or an output. You don't get any benefit from that until it's in use in operations. And the thing that people frequently fail to identify and describe with sufficient clarity is that means that there's an operational change stream as well as a technical change stream that's necessary, and these two things have to converge if the outputs are going to be used to generate outcomes and from that benefits. In fact, what I would say is that for many businesses, a lot of the time, there is no need for a technical work stream, but there is always a need for a business change work stream. It might be a change in attitude or a change of operational procedures, etc., but there's always a need. So independently of whether there's two work streams or one work stream, we get results, impacts, products, deliverables, and they get they create a demand on the resources of the organisation that mean that we've got a behavioural backlog in the business, breakdown structure if you prefer, and a technical breakdown structure or backlog in whatever the development community is. And that doesn't have to be IT, it's all forms of development. And there's a call on the resources of the organisation to deliver that, which leads to whatever form of planning that we wish to do. Doesn't matter if it's sprint planning or if it's predictive waterfall type planning. And that then, with an understanding of intent, planning being that if we do these things we'll get this end result, leads us to be able to execute, monitor, and as a result of monitoring, react and replan. And we can do that react and replan on a daily basis with daily stand-up meetings, and 10-day basis with, say, 10-day sprints, or we can do it continuously with Kanban, or we can do it over quarters and years if we're doing more predictive forms of planning. And as a result of that, we deliver products into operational activities where, combined with the work streams of organisational change in operation, we get outcomes and habits and run the organisation day by day. So that's what my RTO DXD is. Run the organisation day by day. And the crucial bit there for generation of ongoing benefit flows is that this becomes habit. When we get habit, we're then going to get benefits flow. Now, there's a few things to note. One is that as that cascade comes down the organisation, so we get the devil in the detail need to clarify, which is why I have the escalate and the buck stops here. And the buck stops here is really at each of the different levels in the organisation. More to clarify on that very shortly. But eventually we get benefits. And then the thing that I put specifically on here, together with a little thumbnail or an icon of a gate, is to say we should be understanding benefit entry tests. And I'm going to later talk about benefit exit tests. And I don't actually mean the benefits have stopped at that point generally. I mean the business has re-established a habitual way of operating, and we're back to run the organisation rather than change the organisation. That's a very complicated picture, isn't it? Let's clear a little bit of the stuff out so we can simplify it. Pressure comes down from the top and leads to two work streams. One in the organisation in terms of the behaviours and the habits of folks operationally, and one in terms of building stuff. And we can in fact simplify even more and just say the focus we need is pressure in the marketplace causes us to have visions. Now I'm just going to re-explain that picture again. So I'm starting with the same background, but I'm coming at it with some different thinking here. So I've already said operation in the outside of the organisation, capital markets, direction of regulators, competition, those sorts of things can drive change. What I didn't emphasize in the last slide was that actually it might be technological change at the bottom of the organisation. So very typically our technical folk understand that there's capability that we're not exploiting. It's not understood elsewhere in the organisation, but this could be moving up the organisation. I've just explained everything as coming down. There's both. There's up and down. So I'm going to suggest at the bottom of the organisation, my little red alien there is a technical person, project team member perhaps, or an operations person, engaged in operational procedures or engaged in project activities, and with a focus on quality, yellow for quality in this picture. And they operate inside some sort of project or program or operational environment, and they are constrained or limited by things like technical architecture, so perhaps things like TOGAF standards. And there's some level of management above them, either heads of function or program management, and they are constrained by a rule set, governance structures, to pursue value for money, generate returns on investment, those sorts of things. And they sit underneath some form of direction. So we're just describing a governance structure here, and those folk have to implement the vision that came from the board. So there's a picture of the model. I've got some few more things to put in it because I want to get the governance structure in here. So at this level at the bottom, I'm running operationally until some force for change arrives, and that force for change may push me into a project, and that project may then run as adaptive or waterfall, predictive, incremental, any of those sorts of ideas. That's sitting under that middle level that has supervision duties in operations, but then has idea through to benefits flow as its responsibilities. And that's the bit that's a bit broader than the project. So I'm going to define that as program. And I'm going to say one of the implications I think here is to say that every project always has a program around it, even if it's only one project. That's not how the common definition of project and program runs. And I'm going to say that all of that sits inside the portfolio, and that was our previous page. Because now I want to put the governance structures on here. Someone gets an idea, and that idea has no approvals around it, and there is nothing to approve. So we start doing some work that says, if we were to pursue this idea, would it be worthwhile? And that starts to consume resource and get attention. So at some point, we want to ask officially, should we continue to pursue this? And I'm going to say Q for qualification, and it's gate number 1. And then I'm going to say sanction for the point at which the organisation says, we will commit enough to say whether or not this thing should be allowed to proceed. and that's gate number 2. So that's why we got Q1 and S2. And I'm going to say typically the qualification bit starts in the middle of the organisation, but the sanction bit is at some sort of portfolio or investment community level. And if they say yes, that's okay, then we start to get delivery. And delivery may be iterative, agile, which is why we got 3-3-3, so that we've got, because we might have multiple deliveries, but we could have just one. And then I'm going to say fourth is we close out the project activities because they have delivered the technical work stream. But this is where the most focus now needs to come into how the business takes that capability that's delivered and starts to generate benefit, or if you're a public sector, you start to generate value for money returns. And the benefits start flowing after that. And at some point, we need to make the decision that says we're back to business as usual, and that there is no longer a project or program type activity here. It's now just RTO, run the organization. So that's now added the governance structure over the hierarchy and said you could be coming from top down or bottom up, and probably in most cases both. So again, let's just simplify the diagram and let's just summarize a few points. Nothing new now, just repetition. At the bottom of the organization, we have the realization of what's come from above. Something slightly new to say, we're constrained here by physics and politics. This is the red bit of change the organization or run the organization, whether we're in operations or in technical delivery. We're operating below the management level of translating strategy into action, and that's being constrained by things like technical architectures and strategic alignment. And it's also being constrained, perhaps slightly higher up the organisation, by departmental and organisational structure, vision and roadmaps. And I could take a diversion off here and talk about things like Conway's Law, which you may or may not know. Conway said that any organisation that designs a system will design something that matches the structure of its organisational layout. In other words, it will design something that matches its current governance. That second layer of management, split both to strategic alignment and vision and roadmap, operates under direction, which is the board, the vision, the top table, and that's the unprecedented decisions that are forced upon the organisation because of the world around us, of which COVID is currently a particularly current pressure. So just simplifying again, we've got 3 layers there, and I've got a simplistic model of 5 gates. I now want to talk about the timeline for that. So I've still got my layers of the organisation, and I've still got my gates, and I'm going to say that when change arrives, it takes us from a left-hand side of the picture, green, stable environment, into less stable, and then out of less stable to stabilising, and that's old business as usual through to new business as usual. And we have this little bit in the middle, which is the well-precedented ideas of project management, where we go through the structures to have decision making for unprecedented stuff because we're going through change. But to address the topic that was in the title, the benefits bit is on the far right hand side of the picture here, and before we start projects we're on the far left hand side of the picture here. So we need to map from one side to the other, and that's about the benefits management journey, which is much broader than the project journey. And within that benefits management journey is a program management journey, and I could take the program books off the shelf here, but notice how that's broader than project but narrower than what we need for benefits. Somewhere early on, the qualification bit that we've just looked at happens. That takes us into thinking about the change objectives, and I've got double-headed arrow here because I've said to you there are 2 work streams that have to happen. Now, at the beginning of that, I think that what we need to be doing if we're going to link things together is we need to be setting the vision and the goals, and it's not a typo, the next bit. We need our benefit entry and exit tests, and we need to confirm that those benefit and entry and exit tests are achievable within the political power of the sponsor and the technology, etc. So we have benefit entry and exit tests, because at the beginning we're saying, boss, how will you know if we've succeeded? And the boss says, well, everything will be working as I expected in a year's time. And then we say, is it realistic to do this within a year? Do you have the power, the resources, and the commitment to actually achieve that? So right from the beginning here, we're challenging the leadership in the organization to say, when you set us an endpoint target, have you got the will and the power and the resources and everything else to achieve that? So that's one initial crucial start to the process of how do we get the alignment of projects with benefits. The benefits thinking has to actually ask itself and challenge itself about whether or not we have the appropriate alignment. Then we need to know how we're going to do benefits harvesting, and it's okay if we answer that by saying, actually, I don't know at this stage. We need to foster engagement and ownership, and by setting a vision of the end point at the beginning, we facilitate that, but to explore it would mean I'd need much longer than our sort of 45 minutes or so that we're going to be discussing here. And then I need to work backwards from that end point. If I'm going to achieve the end point, what have I needed to have achieved before it? And so on. Because remember, what we're trying to do here is link the end state of benefits to the current state of starting a project. So that's being in two extremes and working backwards from the end point till I get to something that's recognizable as the target for the projects. There's a lot of content in this section. In this session, the slides are all available online. You can go look through them at your leisure. So we've got the business planning bit. We've got the technical delivery of classic projects. I'll clear off some of the mess in a minute, and you'll just see the project section in there. But that's just the little bit in the middle. Look how much surrounding structure there is to have business planning and then business transition. And that business transition leads to us being able to have our benefit entry test. Have we created the circumstances under which the business can now generate benefits? And then eventually the idea of, are those benefits now flowing in a stable state as business as usual? So let's just have a look at a more simple picture. That more simple picture is qualification, two streams of work. One is technical, one is about preparing the business. Both of them start with a vision of where the end is. The vision of where the end is has been challenged as to whether or not socialized is the term in English and nemawashi is the term in Japanese. If you go and Google and look up nemawashi, you'll find some suggestions about how the processes of socializing targets might work in some environments. Now I want to look at the cash flows for what this looks like, and then we're at the point of expressing our tests. In terms of content coming your way, if we were the roller coaster at Blackpool seafront, we're just about getting to the crest and we're about to cruise down the far side. So what we've said so far is organisations have pressures at the outside and intent either cascades downwards or rises upwards. It works through a gated structure. That gated structure has to run from idea to realisation, and the way we do that is we start with the how do we tell what the realisation has got to deliver and start to work our way backwards. And I haven't covered the backwards bit with you yet, but that's coming next. Now I want to look at what the cash flows look like against this picture here, but the background in there is a bit distractingly sort of a bit of start and a bit of end. So let's just clean the background up and just say the cash flows might look like this across all those 5 gates. If I start to invest, I have increasing sunk cost. This is the project spending time, effort and money to deliver something. And I may have subcontractors in there. I certainly have payroll in there. So the lines going down is, well, the blue line going across is the business expenditure, which may be zero until we hit a payment milestone, at which point there's a sharp increment. But that element that I've put up there so far is the project investment side of things. And I could draw earned value or burn down curves on this. So there's a line for a burn down, perhaps. Perhaps a burn down is typically a bit straighter, but that's an earned value curve, very happily. And it's at the end of the point where the sunk cost is the deepest that we start to get to the point where we could possibly be earning returns by having combined our technical and our behavioural changes in the organisation, and now we can start to get benefits flowing. If I turn that line of expenditure up the other way, draw it the other way up, then it is absolutely classically the schedule, the planned value or planned cost of an earned value curve, fitting precisely in with either traditional project control structures, or, as I say, if I draw it downwards, then I could call it a burn down chart. But what now is the position is that we are able to start generating benefits. And we will have stopped traditional projects, but we wouldn't have stopped programs, I hope. We certainly have not stopped if we've got a benefits realization focus. So we've got a cash flow now, or a benefits flow, a value for money, more soup to the homeless, whatever the benefits are, rising up. And at some point on that curve, maybe before or after break even, I'm going to say this is now run the business, not change the business. So I can put the gates on here. So there's my start, deliver, and close the project gates. I had slightly more detail when I showed you earlier. And at some point, I'm going to say benefits entry. We have got benefits flowing. They need to be optimized. They need to be ramped up, but they are flowing. And that's a conversation I probably want to have with the finance director. And at some point, I'm going to say these changes have become habit in the organization, and we're no longer in project or program. We are now in operations. So it's the two gates at the end, and it's the how do I get those in place that's the bit that's crucial to me in terms of the topic title. So that's the whole journey now. Let's start looking at how we might apply some tools and some techniques to that journey in order to make it concrete, to make it the outputs of workshops, to make it the sorts of things that we can have conversations in the organisation with people around, and make it something that we can implement. Now, at this point, I want to take a slight diversion to a bit of philosophy. There's a picture that I think is very important as illustrating a point of philosophy, and it's this picture here. And I want to just role play a conversation very quickly with you. Imagine two people having a conversation, and one says to the other, as you can see, we have a circle here. So they're looking to the left. And the other one says, what sort of idiot do you take me for? It's clearly a square, because they're looking straight on. And it's always a point of philosophy for me, or of concern or angst. When the first person says it's a circle and the second one says, I can see a square, why do the pair of them not say, clearly neither of us can see the whole picture, because both of us are saying with transparency and earnestness that we see something different to the other. So if at that point those two people had thought about what it was that each of their perspectives were seeing, they would say, if we combine our two perspectives, what we see is that we're looking at a cylinder from different perspectives. And the reason that I wanted to put that picture up is because this one is taken straight out of the Managing Successful Programs book, and I'm going to say this is a cylinder where everybody sees a circle or a square, because all the arrowheads on this diagram are the wrong way round. And I'm going to say that the arrowheads being the wrong way round on this diagram is profoundly important for the same reasons that we don't say things like that we have a chairman. We talk about chairperson, for example. The words we use reflect the models that we can build and the things that we accept as normal, and they are important. So I'm going to start from the grey end of the picture with marketplace, mission, and values. And I'm going to say that when we identify the need for a change, a vision, we're talking about a capital transformation that combines those needs into an expression of a benefit flow of some sort, value for money or profit, and that there might be multiple benefit flows coming from our vision. Doesn't have to be, but there might be. If I'd made the diagram more complicated, then those benefit flows and objectives might be supporting more than one vision as well, but I didn't want to make this diagram too complicated. And those benefit flows will only occur if we have both our technical deliveries and our organizational or behavioral deliverables. And actually, I can describe the arrival or the creation of those in the organization as milestones. And now I have worked my way backwards. I have backcast from marketplace pressure and what that means to the organization in terms of vision to milestones that I can give to project managers. So on the left-hand side of the picture here, let's put some project type stuff in. Enabling technical project work, enabling business behavioral transformation, and that behavioral business transformation is creating, awful phrase, but realistic, human capital. And that technical innovation is creating fixed assets, things that can go on the balance sheet. But I've now linked the two halves together, and I can start putting some very concrete test descriptions against this stuff. So over on the far right-hand side, I've got sponsor inspection. These are my benefit entry and benefit exit tests that say basically I'll believe it when I see it, and I'm going to come and check. And I've got a bit more detail to give you to put behind how all that might get framed and described. But I hope you can imagine that it wouldn't be too difficult to start running some workshops now where we give people a template or a outline for what a test statement should look like. We can borrow a statement like, as role, I want feature, so that result, i.e. lifting it straight from sort of agile use case type description, fine-grained user stories, etc. We just lift exactly the same inspiration and we move it 2 levels up the organization and say, as chief executive, I'm coming to check these behaviors are in place because I posit that these behaviors will lead to a benefits flow, and that's directly balanced scorecard type territory. Midpoint, those operational and technical behaviors are the 2 things that are necessary to enable the momentum for the change to build. And I've still got my traditional quality control, quality planning and quality control driven quality activities that lead to me being able to do things like earned value analysis. So that's the structure that might sit alongside some sort of breakdown structure. And I've got a breakdown structure here running from the top of the organization to the bottom of the organization. And I'm just going to put the little backward managing chain of activities that I just talked to you about alongside it. And I'm going to align the grey with the grey and the red with the red. And I'm just going to say now that, so at the top of the organization, I'm going to challenge the most senior person involved in my benefits stream. In your role, tell me what behaviors you will see. And then I'm going to challenge at the operational level. In order for the boss's behaviors to happen, what do you have to have done with your staff in terms of their procedures and behaviors and attitudes, and what infrastructure would you need in terms of systems? And now I've split out the behavioral and the technical. So as head of function, as high-level manager or leader in the organization, I'm talking about my people will be performing these behaviors because these behaviors deliver the outcome that was wanted at the level above us. And now I can turn to people like the finance director or the chief financial officer and say, can you see a change in our benefit flows, in our cash flows, etc.? Because if you can, we had the cause and effect linkage correct. And if you can't, we either had the cause and effect linkage wrong, or we haven't done enough changing people's behaviors, or we haven't built the right infrastructure. So that finance bit is not saying, have we reached a target of, say, 10% more customer penetration? It's saying, can you see customer penetration going up? Can you see cash flows increasing? Can you see the results of the behaviors? And as I said on the previous picture, we still have all that low-level stuff about how do you do project milestones, where you do the missing, wrong, and extra type testing. I've run some unit tests, some system tests, some integration tests. So now we have a structure to work from the top of the organization downwards, and we can use classic tools like network diagrams, Microsoft project and Gantt charts, or we can and work through a design, build, integrate life cycle, classic waterfall life cycle, or we can work through the iterative life cycle of minimum amount to deliver the smallest possible increment. We can use lean startup type minimum viable product approaches here. That's all going to fit in the bottom level. So now we've got our all the tools that we need in place, and I'm just going to summarize the whole, and then I'm open for questions and to explore any of the elements of that more easily. So we're looking to harvest benefits, and we do that either at the end of a waterfall project, or we do it from the point of release in phased projects, continuous elaboration, rolling wave type stuff, or we do it from the point of release in agile and iterative projects. And we do that with some sort of control structure. I didn't take you through the details here, but this diagram that I've just put up here is the Thnx structure, with the references on it are the project management body of knowledge processes. I just integrated the two. They fit together hand in glove. I only really wanted it to say it's a picture in 3 time frames: benefits definition, change definition, change enablement, and benefits harvesting. And it's a model in 3 layers: direction and strategy, management against baselines, and technical delivery. And that Thnx control structure and those PMBok or agile tools and techniques fit happily into the structure here. We can be using Scrum if we want. I don't know if you can see the thumbnail there of the cover of Ken Schwaber, can't remember the other guy's name, with an iterative Scrum type approach there. And what we're overlaying on this is a starting point with leadership evolving and socializing their benefit entry tests, cascading those down the organization to ask operational management what behaviors would need to be in place. And I haven't mentioned it so far, but how would we incentivize that? How would we link to the benefits structures within the organization for bonusing and recognizing achievement from people? And then eventually we hand that down into the community for planning as either adaptive or backlog and sprint structure. Then our subject matter experts can construct both product and behavior changes, and they get things that they have to seek clarification on. That gets escalated. It was the arrow going upwards on the original diagram. And that gives our leadership challenge that says you must act if we are to deliver successfully the benefit entry tests that you said you wanted to deliver. So that's the core of the project structures turning over. Worked perfectly with Thnx and MSP. Project Management Institute doesn't have quite so much to say on the topic, but again, it works perfectly with what's there. And eventually we get to the scope validation tests proving that the projects have delivered the right deliverables. We have the behavioral stuff in the business side, combining with those deliverables and then beginning to understand how to use the deliverables in a new way of working, a new pattern. And if we've got that right, we start to see the benefits flow. And when we're starting to see the benefits flow, we know we're going in the right direction. If we're not starting to see the benefits flow, then we know that we need to take some action somewhere in the behavioral or the product side of things. In which case we now have a feedback loop, and that feedback loop could be exactly the same as in intent as we have at the end of sprints, with a sprint demonstration, product demonstration, and that we have in sprints at the end of sprint retrospectives. So now 45 minutes was pretty swift. Apologies, it's 49 minutes. Was very swift to cover all that stuff. But the guidance we normally get in project management is that little bit in the middle. The guidance that exists is the whole picture. If we cascade, understand our endpoints, cascade them, socialize them, use the capability of our people, then we have connected one to the other. We have about an hour's worth of scheduled time, I think. No, we have 3/4 of an hour of scheduled time to now pick the bones out of this and understand any of the details that you're interested to explore further. It's the sort of thing that I do in my consulting activities. You can find me on LinkedIn fairly easily. There are my contact details. This is about bringing us as organizationally. Yeah, thank you, Asim, for putting the slides into the chat. So this is stuff that I do as bread and butter with program offices and organizational structures, etc. So that's the whole journey.